Hey everybody, welcome back to Trekyards. I'm Captain Foley.
And I'm Connor Cockins, and we're talking Trill today.
Let's talk about Trill, baby. Let's talk about you and me. Let's talk about all the symbiotes and what they can do. Dun dun dun. Yeah, so we're going to talk about Trill today. All the problems, all the interesting things, all the fun things. Anything we can think of.
Yeah, now it's interesting. We both like this episode in general, and as always with Discovery, there's a varied opinion set, and quite a lot of people were calling out the way Trill portrayed, as we've often called out, say, the Klingons, etc. But I would consider the Trill portrayal pretty good, and even to the point where you'd said during our live, this cave was using DS9, and I was like, wait, really? It's quite, a small moment in an episode, whatever, and I was like, yeah, wow. Maybe we appreciate them even more. These are pre-existing things. So what do you think of the Trill overall, and about some of the sort of pushback on the potential? Do you see their points?
I thought the Trill were handled very well. As far as pushback goes, the issue I had is the fact that there was only 5 other hosts. I mean, there are 6 considering Gray, but Gray doesn't. You get the feeling he had the Trill for like a week at the most, kind of thing. It was referenced or inferred at least twice, or implied, sorry, not inferred. It was inferred by some people because they implied it originally in the show, that the Trill, the symbiote, was at least 900 years old and had a knowledge of Federation tech from that era. So 5 hosts kind of bothered me a little bit. But then, as we kind of discussed during that live where we were talking about that, it's perfectly understandable that the symbiote was in a host, went to the Trill ponds for like 100 years, whatever, then got put in another host. So that being said, there's no Starfleet uniforms from that era in the lineup, and there's obviously somebody that was interested in a Starfleet kind of mindset. Hard to say about that. So there are a few things that kind of concern me, but overall I think the Trill were treated very well in this episode. So with
that end little notion of after one event they said, because Federation gets up and going, pretty much consider us in, like this positive message, and you can always have a bit of darkness as long as you show the light. You had all 3 sides of the coin in regards to who was representing them, and they all sort of fold at the end anyway. They joined, so it was although the thing about the 900 years is interesting because the way they classified it, and obviously we are still learning about it all, and we'll obviously learn a lot more next week, is that Stamets said you have a knowledge of 900-year-old technology. So he didn't say you lived that, he didn't know there were Trill yet. So knowledge of is not the same, obviously, as whatever, because Tom Paris knows a lot about old cars. He's not 1,000 years old, and at a certain point, and in my own fanfilm temporarily, I have the same argument of what part. Like, okay, so once you have an iPhone 1, right? This is a Samsung, but if you have an iPhone 1, you can use an iPhone 10. You can. They are interchangeable enough. You'll be like a bit confused by some of the new features, but you can use them. So at what point in the tech stream, or like a tyre, can you use a tyre built for a car in the 1910s and with a little bit of modification fit onto a car from now? Possibly, of a similar size, because So at what point is tech relatively similar? Well, obviously the nuances will be different. By knowing just down to Picard era, maybe they can know Discovery. The caveat is that Scotty from TOS TNG fell out of time, and he didn't know anything. It's not the same as a Trill. I mean, I'm sure he's forgotten more than he's learned, so it's a little bit different than just being a Trill. But maybe just by living in Picard era, as we see one in Picard uniform, as a captain, which would imply he was an ensign in the early TNG, potentially earlier, depending on the age. So that's already that bit of technology. So you're learning about tech. Early TNG, it's only 100 years, 150 since TOS. Maybe he likes the old tech a little bit. Maybe he loved museums. I mean, it wouldn't take much to understand the basics. And clearly, she didn't know anything about the spore tech, but she knew that this console was a console and knew how to put a device in. Like, it was a bit of a stretch to say she knew about technology, given it was just a case of I could put a device in a power thing that connects to the bridge, but maybe she scanned it as easiest. So there's a few things there where the script implies one thing, but there are slightly easier options. So I don't necessarily have to go for 900 as being in hosts, but obviously it'd be weird to think these symbionts don't live a very, very long time. So it's likely it is over 900 years old, but wasn't hosting until later.
If the symbiotes share their information when they're in the ponds with other Trill and other symbiotes, it makes sense that, one that was joined Starfleet, a member of Starfleet maybe, perhaps in TOS time, would be able to actually convey that information to the other symbiotes. And I think that's one of the things about the symbiotes that makes them so important, is that they bring the information back to Trill, and they get all this life experience, all these different interactions, and it's like exploring, going out there, because they are, but the whole benefit, or the whole planet, or at least all the symbiotes benefit from it by bringing the information back and sharing it. So it's possible that they picked up the information that way as well. So
I mean, it's one of those races that we had a character for years and years and years. I went to a few things, but how do they work? How do the ponds work? We don't know, and they never went into it. It's, you know, it's a Schrodinger species. It can do anything until you start explaining it, and once you start explaining it, you're like, oh, is that it? You know, none of us, I think, would have expected that a priest man trained to do so, obviously, can move a host's personality from a person, from a Trill symbiont, into another body. Like, that's an absurd thing to be able to do, really. And I think one of the hosts refused to leave, so it's not as if they fade over time. Like, there's some magical stuff that it can do, that obviously this symbiote, while looking like just a little sort of slugworm creature, is an incredibly advanced, evolved life form. You know, beyond our corporealness, you know. And the fact that we've proven they can join with two species that are similar, but you'd assume internally quite different, you know, and how their DNA works. I mean, just DNA is going to be different. Although, obviously, if you go with the preserver idea with TNG, they're all seeded, so not so much. Oh, Star Trek, your beautiful use of canon. But one thing I know that you brought up, Bruce, I want to bring up slightly now, is that the idea that you know, Burnham didn't know who the Trill were in Discovery, except having met a couple of Trill in her explorings in the future. Although we did see a Trill on Kronos in Discovery Season 1 as an Easter egg, so there is a Trill there. But there's a difference between Trill and a symbiote Trill, because most Trills aren't symbiont Trill, they're just people with spots.
The feeling I get was that Trills were known about, but the symbiont thing was kept very close to the chest, and not many people knew about that. And that, even in TNG, that was kind of like a ooh.
Well, that was their first episode. You know,
yeah,
it was
exactly.
dying, it was trying to heal, and then Beverly was scanning the ambassador, and it was like, oh my god, there's a parasite, that's what's killing you. Oh wait, it's a symbiont. She had no idea, and she's the doctor of the flagship, and this is a Federation early member world, so she would know, which means that the Federation does not know, because she would know. You know, you can't rationalize that.
Jedzi even said in Trials and Tribulations that her past host Emily, who was a gymnast, might have known McCoy. So yeah, the Trill were obviously around. People knew about the Trill, just not the symbiote necessarily. And I totally buy that. That's something that the species may not want to get out, that information, for some reason, whatever it may be. So yeah, keep that, play it a little close to the chest. Don't tell anybody, you know.
Well, I mean, not just that, but if let's assume a symbiont, and there's different reports of being like half the population versus most population could be a host, symbiote, whatever. Let's assume 1 of every 100, and that's pretty high, I would think, that go out of Trill homeworld have symbionts. Well, that means that yes, people have seen them around, but if you ever scan them, they're human. So all the evidence, except the 1 out of every whatever. It took until TNG for 1 of those 1 of every 100 or more to become ill enough to be scanned. Up until that point, why would you need to, you know, although then obviously in that episode again to relay, they say Trill can't be transported, it'll hurt the symbiont. That's a little bit of an issue because obviously Dax beams, but obviously at that point you could easily argue that at that point they knew, so they made calibrations to the transporters, you know, patch 1.6 just to be custom. Or the Trill, I mean, I'm sure the Trill just gave their transporter equations over. You know, it's that easy, so it wouldn't be, you know, I'm sure if there were that few Trill that have hosts, they could always say, oh, I'm just allergic to transporting, let me shuttle. I mean, again, if it's that small percentage of people, you can get away with it, I'm sure, you know. Or they have their own shuttle with their own transporter, which is dedicated to them. So these aren't, you know, I see a lot of people in the Facebook comments saying stuff as if that's the only answer. But as soon as we start talking, like, there are ways around it that aren't pushing the boundaries of realism. It's just a natural, well, this equals this, potentially this, you know.
See, I could buy that there were no Trills in the Federation, or at least in Starfleet, during Michael Burnham's time, because obviously that would require transporting. If you're a Starfleet officer, you need to transport. Otherwise, you'd have to explain why. And I'm sure you get scans so that, you know, before you come on board, so they have a base scan of your, you know, whatever. So I can see no Trills being a member of Starfleet for many, many years, probably old TNG era, to be fair, and let alone one that's hosting a symbiote. Like, so yeah, I mean, there's definitely some caveats to that. However, like, if you're in Starfleet, you're going to be expected to beam. You know, that's not going to have a shuttle for you.
And once one Trill goes into Starfleet, they'll expect all Trill to be the same. But as soon as the one that has a symbiote, like, that cat's out of the bag. You can only do that so much. And Jadzia was a Starfleet officer. Now, what? I don't remember if she was a Starfleet officer first before she became a host. I think she may have been. I can't quite remember. But Curzon was a ambassador. Who's to say? You know, obviously Cisco knew him. At that point, they knew about Trills. At a certain point, I guess not for that long though. But I mean, you could also argue happily that some Trill like told a secret to a friend. By the way, Benjamin, I'm actually 19 people. You know, etc. You can imagine maybe in a circle, and if you're ambassador, because he was ambassador to the Kronos, but you didn't have to tell people you're actually one person of many. You know, you're just. I mean, in the negotiations in TNG, they say my father was the guy that was the ambassador before me. Now they're all me, you know? That's why the older guy was older, etc. So even though Jadzia says, you know, because in the Trials Revelations make a point of, you know, her symbiote is older, she's lived in this era, doesn't mean she was part of Starfleet. And she can still, you know, be around Federation technology, like being in Starfleet, either coming through being an ambassador, etc. And if she was an ambassador as Curzon, I mean, I'm sure ambassador privileges say, if I don't want to beam, I mean, McCoy didn't want to beam, they made him, but he also opted not to occasionally, etc. Same with Pulaski, yeah, I mean, they did it if they had to, but you know, Pulaski did take a shuttle once, and it was like a whole thing. And if Curzon was, you know, I mean, if Curzon was just 100, that was already almost a TOS, and so that's who's famous. And then you could easily say the one before him was, you know, because be a different DAC, so we say his mother, whatever, and then boom, now you're in pre-TOS, and now it doesn't matter, because the Federation's not a thing. So there's only 2 generations of Trill full lifespan anyway, of hosts. So, you know what I mean? It's such a small bit of time for that to be a problem in any way. So I'm not hugely concerned.
I don't see an issue with any of it, really. I like the fact that they showed the previous hosts and that some of them were in Starfleet. I thought that was a nice tie-in, something they didn't have to do. We are 900 years removed from Discovery, though, so like 800 years from TNG.
And the last one we saw was, you know, early TNG would be an ensign, so it does go all the way back there. And two quick points that people have commented to me on that. In, I guess, one of the books, the Daximate was said to be born in 2018, but I don't think that was said in DS9. I don't think they ever said that, so I'm not going to consider that canon, because by that book canon, and there's a lot of book canon. You know how Countdown comics Data's alive? Yeah, he ain't. And the Riker comics, where you know, all these things, whatever, they're not canon anymore, etc. But by that, if that was taken as canon, then 2018 Dax lives, you know, only with, you know, whatever 9 hosts. Although again, as we said, you're not necessarily in a symbiote as soon as you're born as a symbiont. So that already was a slightly flawed argument by them. But I don't even mind if the symbiote was only 400 years old, 500 years old. Because I kind of like they do it being a young symbiote. It kind of adds a little like, oh, I'm young for a symbiote. How old are you? Only 500 years. And everyone's like, that'd be kind of nice to have it be like a teenager, you know, a young adult, which is then fun because every time we see the old admiral, it's like, yeah, he's a young adult Trill inside an old man body. Like that's kind of fun, you know, and it would play into the younger actress playing a younger Trill, whereas the Dax was the opposite. Jadzia, it was an older character in a younger woman. That was the opposite the vibe. And
yeah, we point out, we like to give them credit where they deserve credit, and this is they did the Trill thing really well so far. We'll still have to see how it goes, but yeah, so far pretty good.
They didn't visually redo them. They didn't make the spots purple, because why not? They didn't add, you know. And honestly, I wouldn't even been mad if they'd had like one guy in the background that actually has the ridges, kind of like Picard retconned the use of both styles. To say, yeah, I mean, you know, some of us have ridges for some reason. Most of us have spots and no ridges.
The ridges are Northerners, don't you know? Oh, wait a minute,
always Northerners, always.
Damn Northerners! I should have ridges because I'm Canadian. I'm from the north. Anyway, guys, let us know what you think about the Trill, how they were treated in Discovery, and any Any problems, any foibles, any issues you see with the symbiote thing, please let us know in the comments section. We really appreciate those comments. Also, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to share it around, and just be part of the community, because we love you guys and we want to see you guys on a regular basis.
And we do really feed off that balanced conversation. You know, say a good point, say a bad point, bring it up, talk about canon, whatever. We love that discussion. That's why we're here. That's why we started this channel, to say information and then give our own, you know, bits and bobs about it. So yeah, help us out, join in. Those lives are really important though, because you can super chat to have your voice heard. We read out 100% of super chats, from $1 to 2 to 100, and we have got 100, we have got 1. It's a great spectrum. We always read them out. We always make you part of the conversation, and often that small, you might have thought offhand comment can create a 10-minute discussion that everyone's forced to listen to. But you know what? It'll be interesting and it'll be good. So you can absolutely have that voice if you want to be, and that money does go towards the channel. Allows us to keep making the show free for everyone else. We're doing a certain number of donations, or just, you know, givings to help everyone get free. It's a small amount of people that need it. I need to do it, but it works. And we hope you'll continue to support us for all the free content you've had during Picard, Lower Decks, Discovery, and then Prodigy, and Lower Decks Season 2. So hopefully you'll join us then, support us then, and PayPal, Patreon if you want. But until then, Stuart, he is Captain Foley, right there. I can see him.
Right here. And he, Samuel, is Commander Cockings.